16th floor. Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. Today is December 5th. Welcome to the TED Show. We are at episode 70, and I am so excited to have Bob Kovacevich. Yeah. Right, I did it. I had to practice. With us today, so please let us know that you can hear us. We're in an interesting room because tonight the club has a big event, and so we're kind of in a storage room right now, one of the temple rooms, but let us know that you can hear us. I don't want to do a whole nother hour of not hearing us. Joe Toma's on. Joe, let me know you can hear me. I would appreciate that. Yeah, more people are on. Hey, Gina and Fred. Boy, we got a good group. So let us know that you can hear us. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob was actually my guest scheduled for yesterday, and I lost my voice yesterday. Lots of coughing, I guess whatever's going around. Sat at home and worked and drank a lot of green tea and honey and lemon and no alcohol, though. I didn't go that route this time. And I woke up. I learned my lesson, yeah. Woke up this morning. It's a little scratchy, but it definitely feels so much better. So thank you for being flexible. Thank you for coming in the morning. I love to do 2 shows a day, so and I knew your message was so important, and we talked a little bit about that before the show. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So Bob, I'm trying to think of how we met or who introduced us. Do you know that story? Because I don't. But, you know, Orlando, we were talking about it earlier, Orlando is such a small town that there had to be some event we went to or some person introduced us or something like that. But Bob is, the title of the show is, I titled it, I hope you didn't hate it, Fundraising 101. Mainly because Bob is actually an expert in this and has a company. So give us a little bit of history. This is such an important month for philanthropies and charities, especially because there's such an extra need, which we talked about earlier. But give them a little bit of history about you and how you got to here and how you got to Avatar. If you read his bio online, it's fascinating. So give us a little history.
Thank you. So I'm in Boston, finishing up business school, and my roommate, and I'm going to use a northeastern term.
Oh, good.
Snookered me into coming to a nonprofit organization meeting, where he said, "No one's going to ask you for money, time, or energy. I want you to take a look at how they're strategically planning and make sure that they're on the right track." This organization was in Cambridge, Mass. They were raising money for inner city school kids that were intellectually bright but economically disadvantaged. And so I came to this board meeting, and they're all incredibly smiley and inviting and welcoming. And while I'm speaking, after I'm reviewing what the work they've done in the past, they're taking copious notes and shaking their heads up and down. I became immediately suspicious.
Of course you did. When somebody's taking notes and I'm talking, I'm definitely suspicious.
That's right. And so at the end of it, as you might suspect, and this is how I got involved in the nonprofit sector. In fact, many of us have suffered this same outcome. They said, "We find you to be so pleasant. We want you to stick around and help us go through this strategic planning," which I did. And 18 months after that, they nearly doubled their operating income because of the strategic plan was completely compatible with all of their audiences.
But did you have experience before that?
No.
And had you, obviously we've all been charitable through our lives, but had you thought of that as something you could apply your knowledge to?
Never. And I tell you, the 60s had a lot to do with it, because there I was during 1968, and everyone was chanting, "We're going to change the world in Boston anyway." And so I had changed the world for this little nonprofit organization because they doubled their income. And I thought, my gosh, I'm not going to be rewarded this way in the for-profit sector. I think I'd like to hang around in the nonprofit sector and figure out what makes it work, what makes it stall, what makes it fail. And
Where
so
were you
that's
headed
all I've been
before
doing.
that? Where were you headed before that? If he hadn't snookered you into it, what was your goal or your plan?
I was probably going to go into working for a major corporation.
So you took that set of skills, that knowledge base, obviously you have a gift for it, and said, all right, I said I wasn't going to cough, and here we go. Excuse me. You said, all right, so I'm going to apply that, and they hooked you, because that's what happens. You go in, you see that they're struggling, you believe in what they're doing, you know they're providing services that they could provide to more people, but in a more efficient way. But they need the money, and they need to understand how to implement the plan, and you need money to do that too. And so you're hooked. Sorry, excuse me.
And so I had satisfied that as I said, everyone was chanting the mantra, I'm going to change the world in Boston. And me, as a young man, just fresh out of business school, in an 18-month period, changing the world, I think they added probably 10 scholarships.
Wow.
So
that's impactful.
So impactful. and I got hooked on that whole notion of doing good things.
But back in the day, was that, and even still, I think people don't realize, there's a whole business side to that. You can be hooked and have a heart in it, which you pretty much have to. But you still have to have business acumen, and a lot of charities and philanthropies, not picking on you, but your goal is to provide the services, and you rely on other people to figure out how to get you the money to provide the services. So everybody's got a gift, and a lot of nonprofits need a business strategy, marketing, research person like you.
Sure. I think my business initiative revolves around the notion of what the for-profit sector has done so successfully for decades and decades. And that is that before they go to market with a new product or service, they identify a group of people who are users of that product and service and give them a prototype and ask them, how wrong or right is this product? Testing it before they advance enormous amounts of money in production, distribution, and all of that. And so that's what I do for nonprofit organizations. I help them develop a vision of where they want to go, and then help them carefully select a constituency of people to criticize that vision and add to it, and report back to the board of directors so they become informed decision makers. Remember, the people that we're engaging in this process are people that are likely candidates to support the organization with their time, energy, and money.
Right.
Why wouldn't you involve them if you're advancing a major initiative?
And I find that a lot of times that's not the case. It's you serve on a board, and then you find out after the fact. And wouldn't it be nice if you had been engaged? Because the reason you put a board together, other than you need to for a 501c3, is that you want to tap into their resources. You want someone who not only thinks like you, but has some resources you can tap in that you don't have.
Absolutely. And so I have found this model that I've just articulated to be the best model for advancing a nonprofit organization.
That's awesome. And so you decide this, and then how does that progress to Avatar? Because Avatar is your company.
Correct.
So you can read the entire amazing bio on the post that I did this morning. But there's obviously a whole progression that you went through to get here.
Absolutely. And I started with WGBH in Boston, a national public radio station, a flagship station within the network of stations, and was doing some research for them in figuring out what their audiences think about them, and then allowing them to act on that data to influence their programming or behavior and so on and so forth. And as a result of the outcome, which was one that they appreciated very much and implemented and were successful, I decided to start the company. And
because that's kind of an interesting concept. How long have you had the company?
Since 1978.
Okay, so that to me seems like it was ahead of its time, because honestly, having a company that focuses on helping nonprofits, you normally, again, it was all roll up your sleeves and it was all crisis management.
That's right.
And so to have somebody who's organized and actually going at it from a business perspective is completely, should have been, in my opinion, seems revolutionary to me.
It was, and hence the name Avatar. So it's a name that at that time I didn't think anyone would ever name their company after an avatar. But now there's a plethora of avatars. In fact, in Central Florida alone, there are probably 15, from Avatar Bakery to Avatar Computer Fix-It
What's
Place.
the meaning for people who don't know?
Well, the most popular meaning is one that you can create in a internet game, a person that represents you.
Correct.
But that's not at all what it means. Avatar is also a Hindu word for gods that come to Earth. For example, Buddha was one of their avatars.
See, you learned something on this show. You thought it was all about the movie or the games.
And avatar also means an advanced thought or advanced person, and so on and so forth. So,
So how do you get your first organization to go, wow, all right, we love it, but now we have to come up with money for it?
Just an amazing amount of fortitude and getting in front of as many people as you can every single day. And eventually it matriculates. But I had very good outcomes with WGBH, and when I began to promote how well they took that advice and the great stuff that they were able to achieve that heretofore they weren't, I all of a sudden started receiving phone calls, and in that day, phone calls. And there wasn't
That's
internet
right.
then.
We didn't have internet, or we didn't have cell phones then, probably.
That's right. Other National Public Radio stations and PBS stations. And in fact, we did lots of work and continued to do work with PBS.
So fast forward to now, and you're in our community. How long have you been in Orlando?
Since 1980.
Okay, so 1980. So you've seen it grow. So what are some of the challenges that you see with philanthropies right now? Obviously, there's a million of them out there. We all have our heart, things that we want to support. Things like GoFundMe have popped up. People can self-fund or try to self-fund. And that chips away a little bit at the traditional organizations that are out there trying to raise money. So when you take on a client or when you're helping a nonprofit, when you go in there, what are the things that you look for, and what are some of the mistakes that they're making on a regular basis that may be preventing them from raising the funds and awareness that they want to?
Yeah, I think the greatest challenge is a organization's board selection. And most of them that I run into, many of them that I run into, use a willy-nilly approach.
Oh, this must be Northern too. Willy-nilly. No, it's not. Willy-nilly.
Willy-nilly. It's where a board member, they have several seats that are open, and they want to fill the seats, and someone at the board table says, I know Shelley Smith.
Right.
Met her at a cocktail party, very charming woman, likes our mission. I think we should add her to the board of directors and fill one of these seats. And everyone is agreeable, and they add her, and then many times find disappointment. Because one of the three major responsibilities of a board member are setting policy, which is easy for most board members, monitoring performance, which is relatively easy, and the third one is the big one, fundraising.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, Shelley comes on board and is asked to raise money, and she says, "Oh no."
Well, I think you're right. That happens so much. I think also because the expectation is never set. A lot of the boards that I've served on, it feels like it's in desperation mode. And you're right, they want to get a warm body in there. They know they need to have somebody else. There's no vetting process. And not that you're credit checking and felony checking everybody, The point is to make sure they have the resources to contribute, because just having a warm body at a meeting once a month or once a quarter does no good for your organization.
No.
You have to have somebody who is engaged, but not just engaged in the cause, engaged and has the contacts to help you raise money, because if you don't raise money or funds, you can't provide the services. To me, it's a simple thing, but a lot of nonprofits don't think in the business realm.
No.
They don't. And so when you go in, you help them with the board. That's so important. What are the challenges that they face? We talked a little bit about it this time of year. This time of year, everybody's looking for something. It's end of year. It seems like the need increases. They're trying to finish out the year and get funds or secure some sort of funds for 2018 while still serving their base with the services that they have. What are some of the challenges this time of year that you see?
There are, and I think you hit it on the head when you said the need is great, especially during this time of year. And I think you realize that because you're probably solicited by mail and otherwise, more so during this period of time than many others. And the reason for that is that Americans, during the month of December, give to nonprofit organizations more than all the other months combined.
Of course.
So almost all of the nonprofit organizations know that. That's why you receive a plethora of solicitations in the mail and on the phone and in person, wherever you go, because they know that you're likely to say yes if
Well, we're all in a
solicited.
peace on earth, goodwill toward
That's
men
it.
mode the entire month, regardless of your faith or what you celebrate.
I agree.
And so, yes, and it's a good time to tap in, because that's when you're feeling good. That's when you're feeling more generous. It's the end of the year. A lot of people, it's amazing to me how many businesses kind of just shut down from Thanksgiving to New Year's. But a lot of people are in that mode and they're feeling good. They're going to see their families for whatever holiday you celebrate. And so they're in the mindset. So, but there's also there is a need. I mean, I feel like there is a need at the end of the year. A lot of the money's spent. A lot of people have not, fundraisers, organizations have not secured their funding for 2018 because there's a lot of, because it's all crisis management still. Mm-hmm. And so how do you help them with the crisis management part? Because that's, as a board member on a lot of boards, that seems to be where we're at. We get down to it, and then it's the end of the last quarter, and we're all desperate to try to figure out how to keep the services going, and what are we going to do next year?
Yeah, well, I think the model that I expressed earlier is the one that keeps the wolf away from the door. And that is, before you do any initiative that costs a lot of money, test it among your constituencies and ask them, what's conspicuously absent in the plan that we're undertaking? What are cautionary notes that you might express relative to us advancing this in the way that we plan to do? And then conclude the questionnaire with a question that revolves around something like this. I will paraphrase it. Imagine now that this vision of where we want to go is perfect in your mind. Where might it rank in your philanthropy of time, energy, and money? And that's the ultimate. And then you then know in advance, before you risk building some vision in an ivory tower and then presenting it to the public and asking them for their time, energy, money, and are left scratching your head why they're not responding, is because you haven't engaged them. So the important thing is community engagement before you risk a lot of time, energy, and money on behalf of the organization in rolling out an initiative.
Because the market research can be applied across the board. If
Sure.
you are in a business, you know that market research is so important. Just because you have a great idea doesn't mean that it's going to fly with the rest of the world. You may be one of only 5 people that think it's a great idea. Why spend all of that time if you haven't done the research, which is you're applying those business type mentality to nonprofits and not-for-profits. So what do you do how do you take on a new client? Because I'm sure there are nonprofits out there. I see a whole bunch of people on here. How do you take on a new client? Is it because you're not a 501c3?
No.
So this is a consulting company, for lack, market research consulting company. Bob comes in and helps you grow your vision and get more people involved and engaged, which ends up being more funds for you and the services. But a lot of people, I sat on a board meeting where they said, well, we can't afford a consultant. But in reality, they can't afford not to have a consultant. So talk to the nonprofits that are on there. When you engage them, obviously they have to ask you the question, how much do you cost, Bob? And I don't want to talk about costs now, but I want to talk about that conversation you have with them about that. Because that would be the first thing that they'd have to answer to for the board. I've sat in on those meetings, and we bring in a consultant, and I'm like, I know better, but what are we getting for that? How is that going to help me? How's that going to help our bottom line and help us grow? So how do you answer that, or how do you have that discussion with them?
Well, I try to become one with them relative to the vision that they've created. And then I spend a lot of time with them talking about who might be those vital audiences that we would engage to evaluate the vision, and what is their connection to the organization? Do they have a long-term connection? Are they relatively new? And so on and so forth. And we define then that audience that we're going to test this vision with. And once I see that that they have the resources, the ability to not only dream up a vision, but to be able to put it in front of people who are going to criticize it without name attribution, by the way. When I present the report back to the organization, I tell them who I've interviewed, but never ascribe a response to a particular person. In that way, I invite the most candid appraisal from the person being interviewed.
Which is so critical, because you need it to be candid, because you don't want anybody blowing sunshine. You don't want to be told what they think you want to hear.
Absolutely.
You want to hear the criticism, and a lot of people, I think it's this day and age, criticism is not bad. If it's constructive and it's done in a way that there is a solution at the end, or possible solutions to it, then it is a positive thing. And I think people retract from it. They don't want to hear about it. And if you're in a consulting position, the worst thing that you could possibly do to any organization is just tell them what they want to hear. They wouldn't have brought you on in the first place if there wasn't a problem to address.
That's right.
And I would love for nonprofits and businesses to take the ego out of it. I realize you started it. I realize this was your baby. I realize that you formed the board. You've blood, sweat, and tears gotten everything for that organization for the past 5, 10, 15 years. That doesn't mean it's impactful or effective in what you're doing, and you obviously know that you have a need. And that's where you come in. That's where Avatar comes in. But they have to listen.
They have to listen, and that brings me to this point. I always look at the potential client in that initial meeting. Are they able to fall in love with someone else's idea as much as their own? And if they indicate that they aren't, through a conversation, you can usually tell.
Sure, you can.
I try to stay away from that.
Well, that's probably good. You're in a weeding out process, because if they're not open to it, why would you waste all of your time and resources?
I'm in agreement.
And then what happens is, then Bob and his company look like they have not performed. And honestly, that's not the case. The case is that they were never receptive to change to begin with.
That's right.
And so, again, having served on, consulted with so many boards, I see it all the time. They want some sort of fix. We all do, even in business, which it can be applied to business. You have an idea, you want to grow, you need to grow, but you don't have the talents, you don't have the wherewithal. You have to tap into somebody else, another company, a consultant, that can help you with the things that you're not good at. Well, that costs money. It's not free. We're not all charitable, right? It's not a charity. We're not a 501c3. And you have to be willing to accept it. You have to be willing to go, you know what? My basic idea was great, but I need help now. And I've obviously brought Bob on or someone on to help me, so I need to listen to you. But there are plenty of people out there, I call them charlatans, that just tell you what you want to hear, and I think that is such a disservice.
And that's a very good point, and I'd like to follow up on that. And where my consultation with the nonprofit organization, it isn't things that I've dreamed up in my head and want to try out on the organization because I personally think it's a good idea.
That's such a great point.
Every single year since 1978, we send out a survey to people, philanthropists and family foundation heads, and we ask them an umbrella question, a number of questions underneath the umbrella question. What makes you look more favorably on one appeal versus another? And in the early days when I first started doing this, I got modest amount of returns, but I've grown it now where last year we had 550 returns out of the 1,500
wow.
that I send out.
That's huge.
And I shared the data with them, and that's why they like to participate. And this is objectively gathered data. And I glean from that behaviors that I share with my clients and say to them, this is what people who give money want to see within the context of your presentation materials and how you behave.
So powerful.
And all of that. And therefore, I would think you would want to subscribe. Again, it's not something I've dreamed up in my head and want to try it out on.
Correct. You've taken surveys, you've done the research, the market research, and you have the data to back it up. So if you're going to engage Bob, or really if you're going to engage anyone that is trying to help out the organization, you literally don't want somebody who's a yes person. It can be such a detriment to
Absolutely.
What you're trying to accomplish. And then we don't, in the nonprofit side, as you know, the resources are limited. So when you are out there and you decide, I'm going to land on someone, don't land on anyone who's yesing you to death. Mm-hmm. I think that is such a huge mistake that a lot of nonprofits make. And so I love your approach to that, and I think it's so important for them to engage. As a board member, and an experienced board member, I would 100% engage someone who challenged what we were thinking over someone who just told me, you guys are amazing, what you're doing is awesome, now can I have my check for $1,000, $2,000, whatever it might be. I don't trust that kind of yes sir, yes ma'am mentality.
So a case in point is a project. We did a multi-million-dollar feasibility study for the Boca Raton Museum of Art a number of years ago. And we did the feasibility study. Everyone was incredibly favorable in building a new museum and turning the existing museum into an art school. But those people who had the money and knew the museum were reluctant to give money because there were certain blemishes that the museum had that they wanted the museum to fix before they committed their time, energy, and money. So that was part of my report back to the board of directors. Well, they looked at it, and this board of directors was made up of a lot of people who were unable to fall in love with someone else's idea as much as their own. And they said, thank you very much, Bob Kovacevich. We appreciate the report. We're going to still move forward in our own plans and not do anything that you've suggested in here to fix us. So I left, and about a year later, I get a phone call from them saying, listen, we've tried to raise money since you've left. We haven't raised a dollar. We'd like you to come back and make us go through the process of being more compatible with the needs and interests of our audiences, and let's move forward. As a result, and this is not an anomaly, they came in 50% over goal, a multi-million-dollar goal.
So kudos to them in reality. So that takes a lot to come back sort of with your tail between your legs and go, you know what, we should have listened to you in the first place. So kudos to them, because a lot of times, back to the ego, they would just be like, we are not going back to him. We know what we need to do. We need to find somebody who's going to do the same thing Bob told us to do.
And feed us what we want to hear.
Exactly. But how awesome for them to come back. And then, of course, you're gracious, and you allowed them, you worked with them again, and they were 50% over goal.
Yeah.
That's amazing stuff. All right, so We're already at 30 minutes, so give them some parting words. This has been awesome. I could talk about Fundraising 101 for hours because of all of the amazing work that I feel like Orlando is doing, and we have so many great charities and organizations to choose from. Sometimes we get spread thin, those of us who are super involved. So leave them some parting words and some things that they can do, some things that you know, because I know people tuned in to hear that.
So I'm going to hearken back to an ancient fundraising aphorism.
Okay, here we go. Lots of good words.
It's ask for money and get advice. Ask for advice and get money. And that's the whole basis of what Avatar is all about. We take a
That's
vision.
fascinating. I love it.
And we test it among a number of constituencies, build that engagement, and as a result you have this vital audience of people that are likely candidates to donate their time, energy, and money to help you advance your project because they have some ownership once you've engaged.
Incredible. The ownership, having skin in the game is so critical. Again, back to serving on boards, and obviously you've served on a trillion of them, I'm sure. If you have a board member or even an employee of the company that doesn't have skin in the game or isn't on the same page as you, you've got a little bit of a cancer going on there, and you need to really try to figure out how to address that, because that can bring it down, believe it or not, one person. I've been in board meetings where it's us arguing with one person, and that person wins. And the reason that they win is because they wear people down, and that's not your best interest at heart. That's not your vision that you want. You want to have everybody as much on the same page. Doesn't mean you don't get to challenge things, right? Like you said. It doesn't mean that we're yesing everyone to death. It just means that you have the right people on there who at least share the basic vision of how the services that are being provided are good for the community and good for our world.
Informed decision makers.
Informed decision makers. So you've been a joy to have on.
Thank you
absolutely
very much.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for tuning in at 11. We had a great group on here. I appreciate it. And Bob and I will address everybody and answer any questions later. Love the lighting in here. You were a blessing to be flexible today. Again, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for the invitation.
I coughed a little bit during that. I'm going to have to go take some quote-unquote cough medicine when I go back to the bar in a second. But you've been absolutely amazing. Good stuff, a hot toddy. Thank you, guys. We love you. I'll see you back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks, Bob, so much. Appreciate you. Have a good one.